So our passage today is from the first chapter of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And at his starting point, Jesus uses the Fifth Commandment. And he says, "You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, 'You shall not kill,' and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, who is ever angry with his brother or sister will be liable to judgment." So what Jesus is doing, he says that we will be liable to judgment. And it's not in reference, believe it or not, to God's judgment, but it's to man's judgment. For the Fifth Commandment is saying that a person who has murdered someone will be tried at the city gates. What that means is that you'll be tried in your own courts. So Jesus is doing a kind of mind tease. Now imagine going to your attorney and saying, "Listen, I want to take my neighbor George to court because he's angry with me." And your lawyer says, "Has he done anything?" And you say, "Well, no, not exactly, but I can tell by the way he's not talking to me and the way he ignores me that he's angry at me." And your lawyer would have to say, "Well, I'm sorry. Until he does something that harms you, you have no case." When you continue reading on in what Jesus is saying, it becomes clear what Jesus is up to. He says, "And whoever says to their brother or their sister, Raka," which in Aramaic basically means airhead, "then you will be answerable to the Sanhedrin." So you move from the local court to the Sanhedrin, which is like the Supreme Court. And the offense is simply for some low-level verbal insult. So now if you didn't perceive the hyperbole in the first analogy, you can't miss it in the second one. But there's a third stunning image. And Jesus says, "And whoever calls his brother or his sister a fool, well, you will be liable to Gehenna." So without leaving this level of this minor offense by calling someone in anger an unkind name, he says the punishment moves to hellfire. So you can see that Jesus is using a very playful language to make a very serious point. And here's the serious point he's trying to make. He's saying, don't think that you're keeping the spirit of the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," simply because you have not yet murdered someone. Because our anger and the way we react with our anger is often as destructive as death. We can hold a resentment in us toward a person for years and completely cut them off, and there is no life between us and them. And Jesus is saying, you will be answerable to judgment for that type of behavior. We can allow our anger to control us in such a way that we react automatically and we say things to people that are very destructive and very harmful. So Jesus isn't saying that anger is a sin. Of course not. The anger response to an offense is spontaneous. But what we do have behind that is a freedom to take that anger and, with the grace of God, to make it something constructive, to find a voice rather than, instead of being destructive, can actually be constructive. And that takes time sometimes. It takes time to move through the anger, to diffuse it first, ask ourselves exactly what's the issue, and to find a voice that becomes a communication rather than a destructive campaign. This requires prayerful attention to our emotional life. The Holy Spirit can heal that dark stuff if only we can learn to lift it up to prayer.